Just a couple of introductory remarks. I don't know what's happening in the rest of the world, but in Canada today it's Halloween. And I know it's a really strange custom because new immigrants to the country, when they have little children, this idea that you would go out to a neighbor and they would give you things. So I think it's a really, really cool thing anyways. And at the hotel this morning, the hostesses had all this Halloween stuff, and it was quite enjoyable. One of the things I insist on my staff at the City of Toronto is that we have fun. It's very difficult being on the front lines and being a practitioner in this work to have fun. And so that board over there about ideas and suggestions, if you have ideas about how we can inspire each other and have fun, because our quality of life matters too, please put them up. Also in that regard, there's two other things I want to mention. I'm cutting into my 20 minutes, but who cares? Sasha last night introduced to a larger group of people the work that's being done, and she made reference to this display here called Housing, and she encouraged us to play with it, but not sit on it. So do tweet out or take photos of the display, but I think it's fair to say you can rearrange it even, but don't sit on it. And also, just again on the theme of fun, Christelle last night in her presentation on Paris had a little video clip that was about 30 seconds, and it was one of the things that inspired some of their work, and it was a little film clip of Sophie Loren running around the house waking up people. And the inspiration for that was about how to design the space within housing and how housing is used and being non-traditional and innovative. But she went back to a film including Sophie Loren. So I don't have anything here, but I thought that was a fun thing to include. But I'm going to look for something when I do a future presentation that includes something like that, because it was, for me, it was one of the standout moments of the presentations last night. Okay, Housing Now. I have 20 slides, and I'm going to walk you through what's going on in Canada's largest city, about 2.7 million people, and I'm delighted to be here to do this. So I'll talk a little bit about our housing context in Toronto, what is known as our Housing Now initiative that was approved in January of this year. Our first phase, a little bit on the sites themselves, some of the challenges and opportunities in the work that we're doing on these projects, and then some closing reflections about this activity. So a week and a half ago in Canada, there was a federal election. Our election for the City Council and the Mayor of Toronto was held in October of 2018. So a year ago, essentially. And I want to stop here just for a moment to reflect on why elections matter, and being a practitioner that works with the interface between the bureaucracy and the political side of the world. And housing touches both. And so anybody who thinks that we can get this work done without the politicians is wrong. And if the politicians think that they can get this work done without us, they're wrong. There's this synergy between those two worlds. And I've had the pleasure in my career, or perhaps maybe the stress, of working between that space. And I refer to it as the gray space in the sense of figuring out how to marry two groups of people that frankly often have completely different views and ideas of the world. And the magic happens when we get it right. So, a year ago, there was an election in Toronto, and it was really about housing. The mayor, the current mayor, made a commitment over 12 years to build 40,000 new affordable housing units. Everybody says to me, well, is that like ownership units or rental units? It's rental housing. Don't blur the distinction. We need rental housing in our city. So 12 years, 40,000 rental housing units. The last day to register in the election in July, our former chief planner, Jennifer Keesmaat, jumps into the race, and she makes a commitment of 100,000 new affordable rental housing units in 10 years. So here we have it now. We've got this race going on, and the number one issue is my issue. It's affordable housing. I mean, honestly, I should be so happy and thankful. Well, let's put this in context, right? The national housing strategy for Canada for the next 10 years is 100,000 rental units. Not even affordable. And I've got a candidate for mayor saying we're going to do 100,000 affordable units in 10 years. The commitment the mayor has made of 40,000 housing units resembles the level of social housing production that occurred at the highest moment in Canadian history in the 1980s. And in Toronto, we were doing, and David will tell you this perhaps later in the panel, we were doing about 3,500 units of social housing in Toronto. And today we have 100,000 units of social housing in Toronto. So what Jennifer Keesmaat was proposing to do in 10 years, it took us 50 years to do. So our politicians are way, way out there, right? Election night comes. Between those two candidates, they got 87% of the vote. Mayor Tory wins. Mayor Tory received about 63% of the votes. But between the two of them, 87% of the population voted for housing. Very, very powerful. Very, very powerful. And before I move on, last week in the federal election, we also had very significant commitments being made. The NDP, 500,000 units in 10 years. And the provincial, or the federal Liberals, of course, the 100,000 number that they had. So I have a mandate in Toronto to get this done. So you can understand why my shoulders are so big, or maybe tired. But similarly, I think we need to look at the results of last week's federal election as having our minority government in Ottawa as having a mandate to get housing done and to get it done faster and more than what the previous Liberal government had committed, even with the majority government. So that's the political kind of piece I just wanted to kind of lay out in terms of the context. We're also in the midst in Toronto of completing a 10-year plan on housing for the next 10 years. My job too, I have to do that. I have to deliver housing, and I also have to come up with the policy. So the first place we started was with a market analysis and an analysis around where we think housing in Toronto is going in the next 10 years. We hired a couple of consulting firms, and they ran a bunch of modeling, and we basically looked at what And where are we going in the next 10 years? And what does housing for you and me or a person down the street look like in 2030 and 2040? And I have to tell you, it's very grim. And so these targets that the politicians were making are frankly not that far off as to what we need. The real challenge is how we get there. And in Toronto in particular, and I think in other global cities we find this, people find themselves stuck and stressed out, stuck in situations where there's a lack of mobility and opportunity. And so a woman in a victims of violence shelter who's supposed to be there on an emergency basis is there for a year and a half. A person who is in social housing will never move, because why would you? And in the rental housing market, if you moved, you have to go into the marketplace. And so why would you do that? And when the average home in Toronto to buy is $1 million or more, it's out of the reach. And so our problem, frankly, in Toronto, not only are people stuck and stressed out around the housing condition they find themselves in, but they also find themselves in a situation where they're rethinking whether this is a city that has room for them and whether they should move, particularly millennials and younger people. And secondly, they're thinking, is this a city that actually would welcome me if I was to come here? One of our big challenges going forward is within the next decade, we're expecting about another 1 million people. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Now let me shift gears a little. The Housing Now initiative. In my career, this is probably the most exciting thing I've done in a while. Mayor gets elected. 2 days after the election a year ago, he holds a news conference and he says, Sean's going to come forward with some land that the city owns to build housing. Okay. So we have an organization at the city that is a real estate organization called Create TO, and they assemble and hold land. And I met with the Create TO people, and I said, you know, the sites that I want are sites on subways. I want high-order transit sites to build affordable housing. I don't want that site out in suburban Scarborough. I want good quality, high-value sites, because poor people deserve to live there too. And poor people, frankly, more often than not, may not own a car, but they have to get to work, and their commute is important. And making that commute easier and more affordable means they have to live near subways. So the first phase of the Housing Now program essentially is to scale up to get that at 40,000 number that the mayor has requested. These 11 sites alone represent 10,000 units of housing. And as a part of the 10,000 units, we have fixed on a mixed income approach, where essentially it breaks down to a third, a third, a third among the 10,000 units. So 1/3 of them, or 3,700 of those homes, will be affordable rental housing. Another third will be market rental housing, and then the last third will be for ownership. But we made a very distinct choice that 2/3 of the overall development would be rental. Previous to this, our real estate agency was monetizing these sites, and they would be luxury condos. So we made a very, very distinct decision that we would not do that. The paper that I've written doesn't go into the economics, but I think through all of the presentations in the next 2 days, economics is the underpinning piece to this, the business case that supports whatever we want to do. This program, to do 3,700 units, is costing the city about $750 million. $750 million. in real estate value we will give up, as well as we will charge no development fees, no building permit fees for the planners in the room, no planning application fees, and we will also, on the lands that are the market and the affordable rental, we will lease them for 99 years. So we are not giving up the property. They are being provided on a 99-year lease term. And for 99 years, the affordable units will pay no property taxes. So the city is in for $750 million. At the present moment, our federal government is in for zero, and our provincial government is in for zero. So this is the kind of leadership that my city council is bringing forward, and the mayor, and the political permission that I got from the mayor, the council, and the electorate to do something like this. Nothing's been done like this before in our city. This is the first 11 sites. The 40,000 target, we've now done 3,700. We have a long way to go still. But we have a template now which we're looking to replicate. Some of the priorities related to it as well is that we want that diversity of incomes, and also that we committed to a strong public consultation process. So, getting organized. As part of the $750 million, I also put in a request, and the council approved $20 million to staff up and to hire the necessary consultants to get the work done. So $20 million, 3,700 units of affordable housing on transit-oriented sites. Not cheap. So this gives you all of the internal groups within the city that is getting organized around this. My office, the Housing Secretariat, our city planning, our Create Joe, which is our real estate agency, our shelter support and housing group that does administration, our city legal people, which are very important, and then a brokerage firm, CBRE. Among these groups, we also took the approach that we would pre-plan and pre-approve all of the planning permissions. So when the development community essentially bids on the sites, they're already approved. The $750 million last January was approved. The decision on who will build, I make. I do not go back to City Council. So we have certainty for all of the players that are working on this that we're serious and we are going to go forward, and the politicians have now made all of the decisions that are necessary to move forward. Timeline for delivery, essentially we've broken down into 3 phases. We're in phase 2 now, which is the market offering, and then phase 3, which will be the delivery, which will occur in 2020. We're committed to having all of the 3,700 and the 10,000 units completed by 2025. Very, very ambitious to get there as you get these projects under construction. Affordable to whom? Often the question I will get asked. And what we essentially have done is created a program which is helping that lower end working person or family within an income range of $21,000 to $52,000. We have also told, because these are large developments, which our nonprofit sector in Toronto is not mature enough and financed enough to develop, that they have to bring with them a nonprofit partner to help, particularly on the operating side and ensuring that the units, as they're completed and rented up over the 99 years, reach the right target groups. Community engagement. So we started with 4 sites initially, and we met with over 1,000 people. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that process, but very quickly I'm just going to walk you through the 4 sites themselves. 140 Merton Street is a project we've actually decided will be a nonprofit project alone because it's a smaller project at 180 units. This is right on the Yonge subway, which is right at the spine of the city, and it's a 7-minute, very slow walk for a senior to where the building would be. This would be a 99-year long-term lease. The second site is Warden Avenue, again right on the subway. It's 20 meters, so it's 3 minutes from the subway. Victoria Park, 4 minutes from the subway, 508 units. And the Wilson Heights project also is 5 minutes from the subway. Public consultation, as I've indicated, over 1,000 residents participated. And I'll just take a moment here, and I have a couple of minutes left, but I chaired these public consultation meetings, and there's like hundreds of people coming. And the first thing I said to them, I said, you know, my parents came to Canada in 1948. My mom was in the Royal Air Force, my dad was in the Royal Navy, and Toronto welcomed them. They were welcome to Toronto. And we have 1 million more people coming here in the next 10 years. And I'm looking out at the audience, and there's a whole assortment of people in the audience. And then I said to them, and, you know, let's just respect each other, and in the conversation around what we're doing here, let's be respectful of what each other's views are about buildings and what we're trying to do to Toronto. But my experience and my parents' experience is that we were welcomed here, and that's what this is about. And I have to tell you, the temperature in the room went right down, and people came up to me afterwards and said, oh, well, we thought you were going to talk about the buildings, but you're actually talking about people. You're really human. And it was really amazing, because there was a connection. And I've said, there was like people, it was more of a yes in my backyard as opposed to no in my backyard. And it wasn't like I was a government official kind of imposing this upon people, but people really felt this was an important thing to do. However, we do have some challenges around this project. One is managing the expectations. It was the mayor that named it Housing Now. Okay? Sure, I know he wants it now. Okay? My chief planner, between you and I, called it Housing Whenever. Okay? Because of the disconnect between what the political will is, the public expectation is, and how fast we actually can move. We also have the challenge around scaling it up, and we also have a challenge of our building industry in Toronto being drunk on condominium development. Actually, our biggest drug addicts are condominium developers. In the last 5 years in our city alone, 80,000 condominium units have opened. 4,500 rental housing units, 5 years. The mayor wants me to do 40,000 affordable rental units in 12 years. So huge political disconnect between what our industry is doing, most of it basically it's related to the commodification or financialization of housing, where 50% of those condos will be owned by investors and rented. So that's the kind of city that's being built around an economic model which really is not about people, but it's about profit. However, I think this initiative itself, if we can get it right, will restore some public confidence that their governments are working to a common goal. Because we actually are losing the public, and because the market essentially is being running the show. As well, I think it will provide some relief for people in our city that need affordable housing. This is one initiative. Working with our federal and provincial government, there is also being introduced through our national housing strategy a Canada Housing Benefit, which will help top up people's incomes to afford rent. And what I've told the mayor is I can only do so much through a housing program. There needs to be other tools, income support programs, and other approaches to deal with the scale and the size of the housing problem that we face in Toronto, and I think globally many cities face. A couple of closing reflections, and I would say I have found myself in my career kind of blessed, if you will, to have had the opportunity to connect the political will in this instance with our ability to do this. This is hard work. And I think anybody who's doing it knows it's hard work, and it requires a level of perseverance to get it done. But I think we would fail the public if we actually didn't try, and I think to some extent succeed. And I'm hopeful, because I won't be there in 10 years, but I'm hopeful that what we have started here, others will perhaps take some inspiration from, that we can get it done. That at a municipal level, and this is more for the municipal officials in the room, we are at the front lines, and the federal and state and provincial governments really, they don't get their hands dirty. They don't know how to do this work. They're not practitioners. But if we can show we can get this done on the ground, then we can tap into the resources and the funds and the programs that really should exist on a national level, and that this work really shows them that we can be successful and that they can be partners with us in scaling up. And coming out of, just to complete, coming out of the federal election last week for the Canadians in the room, I think what we should expect to see from our minority government is that they will support us in scaling up the work that we have proven and will continue to prove can be done. Thank you very much for your attention.